Well, hello, it's Kesha, and welcome back. We are on Prosperity's Ten Commandments, the seventh commandment. So let us start by first settling in and getting centered. So let's close our eyes. Deep breath in and out. Another deep breath in and out. And we're just going to pick up any cares or concerns, any dramas, situations, anything that's vexing us at the moment, causing us to worry. Just pick that up on the in breath and release it on the out breath. And notice how with each intentional inhalation and exhalation, we are becoming more and more clear, more and more centered. Just bringing all of our attention back to ourselves, removing our attentions from any of those cares and concerns. And if we feel corded to anyone, or if anything feels corded to us, just release those cords and let them go back to source. Feel them disconnecting. You are now untethered and free, held in the gentle space of spirit. Another deep breath in and out. On the next in breath, see a column of white light coming down over you. And as you breathe in that light, notice how it quickens the mind and the heart, the cells of the body. We're feeling now more present, alive, and whole. And in this space, when you're ready, gently open your eyes. All right. Prosperity's 10 Commandments. We are on the 7th commandment. Money is an outer form of spiritual substance. Like all form, it has only the life and power of the divine idea that animates it. The animating idea in money is supply. Money is a medium of exchange used in our modern civilization for the supplying of our material needs. When we awaken to the truth that God is the source of supply, we recognize money as a symbol of His abundance in our life. Realizing this, we see our responsibility to use money intelligently. Just as the body temple is destroyed by destructive thoughts that defile it, so our financial security, which is a part of our circumstances or our extended body, suffers through our evil use of it. The creative process in mind through which prosperity is demonstrated is clearly indicated in the first three of Prosperity's 10 Commandments. Thou shalt look to no other source but God for supply. Thou shalt make no mental images of lack. Thou shalt not speak the word of lack or limitation. We look to God and His omnipresent spiritual substance or divine energy as the one and only source from which our good can come. And I tell you this, some of the most powerful affirmations I use in the manifesting of money are divine substance meditations. Divine substance is the one and only reality. Divine substance manifests for me here and now in the form of immediate supply. I used that one, was it last week, the week before last, and had money come to me within an hour. When you recognize that God is the source of your supply and it is through substance that it manifests, you can ask that divine substance manifest and mold for you in the form of and in the amount of the money that you need. And I'm not kidding. Some of the most powerful affirmations. We know that His divine energy quickens our thoughts, mental images, and words, and fills them with the creative power that projects them into the world of form. When we associate wealth with thoughts of greed, selfishness, or lust, we are defiling our mind and making base use of God's golden stream of spiritual substance, which carries within itself the potentiality of limitless supply for every possible need. When we associate unworthy thoughts with wealth, we make unworthy use of wealth. When we make unworthy use of God's good, the laws of life take bitter toll of us and we pay in terms of disaster. That would seem a little dramatic, but whenever we have a hardship, it seems pretty dramatic, right? When we make worthy use of God's good, we have the joy of seeing it increase in our life, and we have obeyed the biblical exhortation, thou shalt remember Jehovah thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth. There are many ways of making evil use of money. The most common is that of using it to pamper worldly appetites. I'm going to disagree with that one, because there's nothing wrong with luxury. There's nothing wrong with enjoying what the world has to offer to the extent that you're able. And just keep in mind, too, that all things that are manifest because someone had the idea, and the idea is of God. So if they were able to bring something truly beautiful and luxurious into the world, it is there for the use of those who would be on the same, be of the same consciousness to enjoy it. And I absolutely do not believe that expressing spiritual abundance in our physical existence is an indication that, let me go back and rephrase that. It is possible to enjoy a rich and full spiritual existence, having the flow of money to use at your will and discretion. It is not some badge of spiritual honor to be poor. That simply doesn't make any sense. Not if God has provided for our every care and need, should we walk around in lack and limitation, or enjoying less than what we think is appropriate for our level of consciousness. I have no problem with luxury and people enjoying it. No. Every such use takes severe toll of the individual, frequently resulting in the actual loss of money itself. Again, I don't agree. Persons whose mind are made sluggish through the overindulgence of appetites may lose fortune that makes such indulgence possible. Well, we know everything in moderation, right? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Even though the money itself is not lost, the individual often loses the ability to enjoy it. Sometimes, yeah, we can become numb excuse me, we can become numb to anything that we enjoy to excess, and it's not that it's money and we've overindulged. It's just that it could be anything. If we eat too many cookies, it could be that, the next time we see a cookie, we're less than excited about the possibility. How many people of you know somebody who's maybe worked in fast food, sold burgers, and then won't touch a cow? You know what I mean? Or, won't, So, yeah, we're going to have some disagreement there. Oftentimes, wealth is used to gratify a lust for power. Wealth and power often are linked, but they don't have to be. People become money mad and use their wealth ruthlessly in order to increase it and so satisfy their ambition. If someone is driven by ambition and power and will use any means necessary to attain it and maintain it, money is just a means to an end. It doesn't mean that having the wealth itself is necessarily negative. You can be a quiet philanthropist and, enjoy your wealth to what you consider to be good ends. Dishonesty, misrepresentation, and trickery enter into their business dealings, and their wealth is used to oppress rather than assist their fellow man. There are a couple of different ideas in that sentence. I'm not sure that I agree with the first part, certainly. Dishonesty, misrepresentation, and trickery enter into their business dealings. That is, the person that engages in those types of business dealings would be unscrupulous anyway, whether or not they had money. So money is not the reason, and great wealth is not the reason for their dishonesty, nor necessarily the advance of power. Because you can amass power and use it for good, and it doesn't have to be consolidated through dishonesty or misrepresentation or trickery. I'm going to say that's an old belief, and it's not particularly well fleshed out. I just don't agree with that. Wealth can be used to oppress others. Imagine what a world it would be if Jeff Bezos were to pay all of his workers, especially those in the warehouses and whatnot, and drivers, more than a livable wage. Set a standard not for the lowest we can pay somebody, but what's the most we can pay for the services rendered, especially since technically he's not going to miss that money. So yeah, I mean, those are just choices of the individual, and how they choose to spend their wealth is more indicative of their state of mind and their consciousness and sense of morality, more so than the money itself being the expression of dishonesty, trickery, and misrepresentation. They're debasing their wealth, defiling God's bounty. You know, if God gave it to you to use and you were able to do that, how you choose to use it is up to you. And if you don't see a problem with it, well, then that's on you. And no one else can sit in judgment. This sounds like a lot of judgment. Whosoever makes wrong use of God's gift defiles his house of life, either his body or circumstances, and him shall God destroy. Interestingly enough, in a book that's about prosperity, that's a very Old Testament, wrathful God kind of way of thinking. You have not heard me be so hot or disagreeable about a book before, but I'm not in agreement, so that's that. Many people cannot stand prosperity. Now, this is true. They lead a steady, useful life until they begin to demonstrate wealth, and then they are thrown off balance. Sometimes. Depends. This lack of balance may become evident in wastefulness and extravagance. Who are you to judge? I am not enjoying this, not in the least. There is an idle use of money, a heedless, thoughtless use. You know, I don't imagine this is going to come next, but let's think about the prodigal son for a moment. When the prodigal son takes his inheritance and goes off and spends it as a profligate, and then finds himself sleeping with the swine, when he comes back to his father, he's met with a signet ring and fresh clothes, and he's welcomed with a hug and we're glad you're back. So there's a learning experience in that, right? He learned that he could be loved even in spite of what everybody else would have considered a failing. I'm going to pass by it because I'm not going to hold on to that thought, but I just disagree. Everything in God's kingdom is to be used intelligently. Would that were so, but I would say that everything in God's kingdom is to be used. And we find, we learn through misuse as well as use. Ideally, you want to use it intelligently, but sometimes the way it is used is figuring out what is the most intelligent use. And so let's not be so heavy-handed. Even Jesus told his disciples to gather up the broken pieces when he had more food on hand than was necessary for feeding the multitude. Logically, those fragments were put to some good use, else they would not have been gathered up. No, let's just not leave God's bounty lying fallow. Let's be respectful to all of it to the very last, and dispose of it properly, or whatever they did with it. So that's a supposition on her part that is trying to prove an argument that, well, quite frankly, we already know I don't agree with. All nature teaches balance. Nothing in it is ever wasted. Nature produces most lavishly, but that which is unused in the human or the animal kingdom disintegrates and returns to soil, enriching it for the production of future harvests. If we take a lesson from nature, it is clear that the balanced use of wealth demands that waste and extravagance be eliminated. I would say use your wealth on hand to the best of your ability. Allowing wealth to be an excuse for laziness is another way of debasing it. Any use of wealth that hinders the soul's progress is an idle or evil use. That's an awfully judgmental statement. Because who's to say what actions or inaction is hindering the soul's progress? I don't know what your soul needs in precisely the soul journey that you're on, and what experiences you need to have in order for you to be successful. So it's not for me to judge what I think I see, right? A few years ago, a young man was involved in a lawsuit for an inheritance. It was a sizable inheritance that would have enabled him to live in comfort, even luxury, for the rest of his life. The inheritance was justly his, but a number of false claims were made upon it. Although he was a truth student receiving spiritual aid through prayer, the case failed to come to a quick and satisfactory conclusion. Through one technicality after another, it dragged on. It was a puzzling situation. One day, after a period of prayerful treatment for the manifestations of divine justice, his teacher asked him, "What are you going to do when this case is settled and you have the use of this fortune?" His instant answer was, "Oh boy, first I'm going around the world, and then I'm never going to do another tap of work as long as I live." From his answer, it was evident that there was divine protection for him in the fact that the case had dragged on for so long. Yeah, no, not necessarily, because there's something beneficial in travel, and two, just because someone at the outset says they're never going to do any more work doesn't mean they're not going to do anything and therefore not have any other contribution to society. So that's an assumption in judgment that isn't grounded in fact or reality, frankly. He was doing well in a line of work that held great possibilities for him, and that, if followed, would bring out his latent talents and help him to develop a well-rounded, useful life. He was helped to see that what a definite disadvantage the money would be to him until he had reconstructed his whole attitude toward it. He soon grasped the idea that money is a form of manifestation of God's limitless supply, and that to be of value to the individual, it must be used in a way becoming to the divine abundance that it symbolizes. When he received the inheritance, he remembered his lesson and became a wise steward of God's bounty. Subsequently, his money was a blessing to himself and others. Yeah, but he wouldn't have learned that lesson had he not been honest in reflecting that he wasn't planning to do any other work. Who's to say by what steps we need to take to reach our desired ends? It is a mistake to think of money as the root of all evil. The biblical passage from which this metaphor is taken states that it is the love of money that is the root of all evil, not the money itself. Well, she's getting that right. Furthermore, Jesus never said that a rich man could not enter into the kingdom of heaven, as is popularly supposed. What he said was, it is hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Well, hell, it's hard for any of us. The work that we do here on earth to grow ourselves to reach the level of entering the space of heaven, which not is something you enter when you die. It's the mental, spiritual, and emotional space you inhabit when you recognize that God is the source of your supply, and you are heir to His kingdom. That road itself can be hard. So I don't think it matters whether you're rich or not, because heaven itself, or this entering into heaven or the kingdom of heaven as it's mentioned, doesn't mean that you have to be stripped of your possessions in order to do that. Jesus had a number of rich men among his friends and followers, men who were honest and upright. These men were earnestly seeking to understand and obey God's will. Among them was one whom Matthew describes as a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. Mark, Luke, and John all speak in the highest terms of Joseph of Arimathea, who received Jesus' body from the cross and placed it in his own new tomb, hewn out of solid rock. Nowhere in the record is there any criticism of this man because of his wealth. We find him accepted without question as a follower or disciple of Jesus. Luke speaks of him as a good and righteous man. Another wealthy and influential follower of Jesus was Nicodemus, who came to him by night seeking understanding of God and his kingdom. Nicodemus was a member of the Sanhedrin, the governing body of the Jews. Undoubtedly, his wealth and influence saved him from their wrath when he defended Jesus against them. My thing is, why did he have to come? He had to come in the night because he was afraid of his position and being seen. He wanted the wisdom, but didn't want others to know, which is fine, because not everybody needs to know your business, but these men were not letting their wealth stand in the way of their goodness and justice, because it doesn't have to. Neither did Jesus' grandfather Joachim. The apocryphal New Testament describes him as a man exceedingly rich who gave freely of his riches to both God and man. Nowhere in the scriptures do we find condemnation of wealth as such. Well, this I am glad she makes mention of. Only condemnation of the wrong use of wealth and its evil effects upon some people. Well, that's fair. We know that on one occasion Jesus refused to accept a certain rich young man as one of his followers. I don't know that he didn't accept him. He recognized that he wasn't ready. I mean, what was the scripture? Let the dead bury their dead. I mean, the child just wasn't ready. But that's not a condemnation because of his wealth, and it wasn't that Jesus didn't allow him. It's just that he recognized, he wasn't ready. Besides, Jesus doesn't allow or disallow. You have to make that choice of yourself, and that kid wasn't ready. Why? Because one was a slave to his wealth and the other was a master of it. Okay, yes, so let me go back. We know that on one occasion Jesus refused to accept a certain rich young man as one of his followers. Yet we know that he did accept Joseph of Arimathea. Why? Because one was a slave to his wealth and the other was a master of it. Yeah, but again, that wasn't because Jesus made that decision. It was because that's where they were in consciousness, and that's the decision they made for themselves. Because you know what? If that's the case, then how is Judas there, right? Anyway, I am not in. We are having a little discussion today. Joseph knew how to use it in God's service, even as Jesus' grandfather did. Both men knew themselves as stewards of God's bounty. We are all stewards of God's bounty, and it behooves us to recognize that. Because if you recognize that, then you accept your money, and you accept your money in reverence, and you spend it with respect. They administered their wealth wisely and well. They did not debase it by using it for idle or evil purposes. They kept it in circulation by serving God and man. Jesus knew that wealth was every man's divine heritage. He knew that God is the source of all wealth, and that when men realize that God's is the ownership, and theirs the stewardship, and conduct themselves accordingly, wealth can teem with spiritual blessings. He also knew, and from this knowledge, he sounded his warning, that when men mix their thoughts of wealth with thoughts of lust, selfishness, extravagance, waste, and laziness, they are adulterating God's good and keeping themselves from enjoying happiness and harmony in the use of it. Well, that's only because the definition of evil is inharmonious mixtures of things inherently good. I don't believe that we have the capacity to experience lust as a bad thing unless given to excess. But enjoying feelings and thoughts of pleasure isn't a bad thing. We were given that receptivity for a reason. And to not make use of it is to not make use of all of what we have access to, which is not keeping with being a good steward of God's good bounty. Wealth is a symbol of God's abundance, and as such, it is a blessing. Well, amen to that. When used in a way appropriate to the divine source from which it comes, we can truly say, the blessing of Jehovah it maketh rich, and addeth no sorrow therewith. He who understands this obeys prosperity's seventh commandment. Thou shalt not debase thy wealth to idle or evil uses. Put your wealth to your best use possible. But only you can decide what that is. And, even better if you can be in concert with God when you're making that decision. And if you're tithing, then of course, God is your partner. So you're including him in the guidance of the stewardship anyway. So you're not really in danger of idle or evil use. Well, that brings us to the end of the seventh commandment. That one was a little contested, that second half. I think the last time I had direct issue with a spiritual book on manifestation was probably reading the Prayer of Jabez, and there was just one little paragraph that I X'd out in the different copies I've had. But nothing wrong with contention. It just means that we are at a different level of consciousness and understanding, and are willing to work with that energy a little bit differently. All right, so if I've said some things that have excited you, let me know in the comments. If you agree or disagree, let me know. Yeah, that was a little bit that was ripe for discussion. All right, we'll be back next week Moving on to the 8th commandment. I'll see you then and love you in the meantime. Bye.